Sherica Hymes, and I am the founder and host of the Total Woman Summit. And we are on our second week of our 11-day, 26 speakers, 22 sessions in our free virtual workshop series. We have had an exciting time up to now, and we expect no less tonight as we conclude our conversation on domestic violence. So for those of you that are new to the Total Woman Summit experience, the summit was created to empower women through education, connection, and community. And in keeping with our commitment to education and community, we are today discussing COVID-19 and domestic violence. And so we brought in the experts that are on the front line doing this work that help us move the needle forward and hopefully drive these numbers down, to talk to us to raise awareness, to also help us understand what we can do to help those that may need help to escape these situations. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest for tonight, Marquiepta Odom, who is the Executive Director of the YWCA of Greater Memphis, which also encompasses the YWCA Domestic Violence Shelter. Good evening, Marquiepta. How are you?
Good evening, Sherica. I am well. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you also.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So we are going to go ahead and get started. And before we do, we are going to go ahead and ask someone in our listening audience to tell us if they can hear and see both of us okay. So drop us a line in chat. Okay. Don't all rush to do it. Somebody tell us if you can hear and see us okay. Okay. All right. Looks like that they can see and hear us okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. So I would like to give you guys sort of the rules of engagement for tonight. So rule 1 through 50 is we are going to have some fun. This is not a topic that we take lightly, nor will we minimize it, but we are still going to have fun if we have this conversation, and we're going to engage with one another. Yes. Rule 51 through 100 is you're going to talk to us, and we're going to talk to you. So you do not need to wait until Marquiepta and I are finished talking. You can drop questions in Q&A right now. If you already have those burning questions, you can drop them. We will answer them throughout the duration of the conversation, or you can drop them in Q&A anonymously, or if you're feeling super bold, you can drop them inside the chat, and we'll get to them as the conversation progresses. This is about you, this is for you, and was created with you in mind. So, and we have Shamel, who's going to be navigating the chat for us so we can stay involved in the conversation. She's going to drop all the nuggets of wisdom. Make sure that you have all the information that you need to know. So feel free to do that. So let's get started. Marquiepta, tell me a little bit about yourself and why you're passionate about the work that you do.
I guess I am so passionate about the work that I do is, first of all, I am a survivor of domestic violence. Growing up, the first time I experienced domestic violence was by my father. At the age of 13, attempting to get help for my mother, who was actually being abused at the time, and he was an alcoholic during that time. And so I remember going to the front door, and at the front door, he caught me and he slapped me. And so that was my first incident dealing with domestic violence. And of course, that saying that you end up picking someone just like your father. Well, when I started dating and prepared to get married, I married someone who was just like my father at that time. Since then, you know, we've gotten past that. My parents have been married now 53 years, and they have a wonderful marriage. But the trauma that I experienced with the low self-esteem and thinking at that time that that was normal, because my father was the apple of my eye. He would give me, I was a daddy's girl, so he gave me everything and anything that I could ever ask for. And then when that incident happened, it changed the whole trajectory of how I felt about me and my father and how I felt about myself. Other than that, I am a graduate from Bethel University. I am a certified victims advocate and sexual assault, victims advocate, and program specialist. But most of all, I just really enjoy the work that I do But more than that, I enjoy empowering women. So that's who I am all about, just being empowered, making a difference, changing lives and changing destinies. And that's kind of a little sum of it. Is not, to me, it's not all about, the bio is important, but it's about what's in the heart and the work. I try to let my heart touch someone else's heart, and especially those who are needing a hand up instead of always getting a hand down.
And I appreciate that. So first and foremost, I want to thank you on behalf of the community and the women and children and families that you serve for doing this hard work, for being on the front line, for being an advocate and a voice for those who are often overlooked and who do not often have a voice. So thank you for that hard work. I know that it is hard work, it is difficult, and it is thankless work. So thank you. And difficult, geez, it is difficult. And I have had the pleasure of serving the initiative of the YWCA Domestic Violence Shelter with the Total Woman Summit. Last year, you all were one of our benefactors for the Total Woman Summit, and so we were pleased and proud along with our partners and our supporters, to be able to provide not only financial resources, but other resources, tangible resources that you all needed as well. So we are always here to help. And we will share with you towards the end of tonight's program how you all can also support the YWCA and help them continue this work. So you mentioned, Marquiepta, that you are also a survivor of domestic violence, and your first incident was in the home. And so as someone who was in the home with that, was that your first time being on the receiving end of violence from your father because you got in between them, or did things just was that just the escalation point?
No, for me, up until that point, I actually never really saw my parents argue. My father was a truck driver, so he was in and out of town a lot. And so I've never really noticed. My mother never had any bruises or anything of that nature. And like I said, I remember him coming home late one night, and he had been really drinking. And I was actually in the bed, and I just heard a lot of commotion. And that's why I was so fearful, and it scared me because it was something that I had never seen in my household. I am not saying that they did not argue and fuss, but up until that point, they always kept it away from me.
And you know what? So that's a perfect segue into my question. And the reason why I asked that, is it common for children not to be aware that their parents, one of their parents is actually being abused?
I would probably say it's probably maybe a 50-50 chance that oftentimes children are not aware because they do keep it from them. But then on the other hand, there's a lot of children where, they're hearing their parents, they actually hear them physical argue. And then a lot of times the arguments and things like that escalate. So it goes from arguing to pushing, shoving, saying vocal language. And then from next thing you know, it's just an all-out explosion in front of the children and whomever. And so, sometimes it go beyond that. But yes, I'd say it's about a 50-50 because there are a lot of, even when I talk to a lot of ladies at the shelter, a lot of the ones there they did not see it in their home, but because somewhere down the line, something happened to them that they actually experienced trauma from being molested or some other things that caused low self-esteem. And, an abuser, a perpetrator, whatever we want to define it as, is they can spot a woman with low self-esteem 100 miles away. And so, and they would pray.
Can you tell us why? Like, we often hear that, and so it's hard to sort of conceptualize that. Like, you always hear, or at least I've heard often, that an abuser can certainly detect a woman who has been a victim of domestic violence a mile away. But why is that? What is that?
Most of the time, because that abuser, perpetrator took on elements of learned behavior. And because of that learned behavior, it's a certain way that she may walk, and she could be making $100,000 a year, but they watch the way she walk, her demeanor, if she's always looking down, because a lot of women would look down and don't even realize it. Because I remember when I was working at my previous employer, and I remember he's well known in this city. I was walking down, and I was still walking with my head down, and he pulled me to the side one day and said, "Marquiepta, lift your head up." And I hadn't even noticed that I was not holding my head up, just walking and just looking at, he said, hold your head up. He said, you don't want to be a target. At this time, he never knew, he didn't know anything about my past, but he said, hold your head up. Because if you don't hold your head up, you can become a target. I'm like, a target? He was like, yes, you can become a target for the type of man that you don't want in your life. So holding your head up, some of the things that we say, and even some when they first meet us and they greet us, and then we may start going on a couple of dates, and they may say things that we may not like. And instead of us addressing them at that time, we let them get by. And the first thing in their mind, okay, I may be able to get a little further with this one because I said this, and she didn't stop me. She didn't put me back in my place to say, you know what? You're disrespecting me, and I am not going to tolerate that. And we have to get to that point. That's not being over aggressive or anything. We should demand respect from whoever it is, and especially the person that we're dating, because first of all, they should automatically respect us. But if they don't respect us, then that comes a time we're like, wait a minute, let's take a step back. And so it's like the abusers, perpetrators go out seeking those, almost like they're saying that they seeking who they can devour.
Wow. So let's make sure we capture that. Oh, yes, she already got it. She's on it. With your head, calm down. Just be careful about how you're carrying yourself, because you may not even know someone is out here looking for their next victim. And you bring up about a point about correcting behavior when it happens. I'll never forget, I went on this date with someone's a blind date. Somebody fixed me up with somebody years and years ago, right? And I remember this gentleman during that date, I remember he said to me, though probably was on the second date, and he said something like, I was speaking to some guy I knew or something in the restaurant, and he was like, I'm not going to have that. And immediately, I was like, I'm sorry, what? Excuse me, sir. You don't manage me. But it was in that moment that I was establishing, right, what respect looked like. But I knew then that if he was willing to push that envelope, that was a test to see how far he could go. And we never went out again after that. And then I later learned, years later, from a friend that he actually was abusing the woman that he was with, unfortunately. But again, just little things like that, we have to be careful. You're right, that you can actually become a target. And so establishing those boundaries on the front end. So we've been talking about how COVID-19, for many of us, or most of us, has been really, we're just inconvenienced, right? But we're hashtag stay at home or shelter in place. But the reality is, not everybody is safer at home. Can you talk to us about how this particular pandemic and the restrictions of stay at home has actually, someone is riding their bike up and down their motorcycle up and down my street. I'm so sorry. I think they're done. The world is open back up. But, can you explain to us how this has impacted the domestic violence numbers and the increase in the number of families or women that you're seeing?
I think it has a huge impact of what we're seeing right now. And we think about it, for many victims /survivors of domestic violence, they often had peace, or was their time to exhale or inhale when whoever the perpetrator or abuser went to work, or whether they were working or whether they were going to hang out with their friends or whatever. They had many occasions, they had more free time to just kind of relax and not be afraid, as well as for the children. For many of the children, we have to think about their way of escape was often going to school and then going to the libraries or doing the after school activities. But now the victim, and then now oftentimes when children may not have been victims of the violence, actually are now target, and they become victims of the violence because everyone is at home. And in some cases, whoever the victim is, they don't have any free time as of right now, because that person is always around 24/7, because up until this point, with the safer at home order, people are staying at home. And so, and then just a couple on top of all of that, unemployment. A lot of people are now unemployed. Many have been able to get their unemployment, but I know several people who have not, still haven't got their unemployment. So now we're talking about you're at home with this person the majority of the time, and now the income is, the level is not the same. So just income for a healthy couple, when income becomes an issue, the financial issues actually brings on a certain amount of stress, even in healthy relationships. So when we just take a step back and imagine a couple that's having financial issues and they're at home all the time, including their children, because oftentimes when their children went to school, that was also a break. So a lot of times that victim would be at home alone, but now we have everyone is at the home, and in most cases, it's an explosion. I've talked to a lot of people who have not come to our shelter, but they just wanted to know how do I do a safety plan? People have been calling me, put me on 3-ways, and calling the domestic violence shelter saying, how can I stay safe at home? I can't leave. I can't go anywhere because he doesn't give me any free time. I think one person had just went in the bathroom, and I told her, if he's there, you're not safe even at this time. If he goes out for 1 second, and if you're trying to get out, call MPD, call law enforcement so you and your babies can get out, because you're risking yourself to be harmed, even killed, if he finds out that you're on the phone trying to get help at this particular time.
You know, Marquiepta, that is so shocking and disturbing. And I remember in my conversation earlier with our first interview, with our first guest around this topic, she mentioned that the abuse was getting more aggressive and more frequent because now the offenders don't have to worry about you having to go to work, so they're not worried about where they hit you, what they hit you with, because you don't have to cover, nobody's going to see you. Nobody's going to see you, which has become increasingly concerned. Is that also another component to this that's often not discussed is the sexual assault that exists in these. Can you talk to us a little bit about the increased level or more aggressive levels of violence, as well as the complexity of adding into the sexual assault?
Yeah, during this time, it also is an increase time of violence, sexual violence against women or whoever the victim may be, whether it's male or female during this time, because once again, the power and control factor during a time like this, during the safer at home, in many cases, it was kind of minimized before, but now since I have you, your family can't necessarily see you, it's real isolation. And so for a perpetrator or abuser, it's like it's a field. It's like, wow, I can do anything and everything that I want because there's no one to hold me accountable because you can't get away from me. And so oftentimes when she may have told him no before, and then, we have to remember that spirits were still available because most of our liquor stores have been open. And I've been doing some research that around the world, the consumption of alcohol has gone up 300%. And so we think about that. So he may have been every now and then taking a drink, and like my father, when he was actually drinking, that's when he actually became that one time that I saw him, that's when he became extremely violent. So when we think about 300% compared to maybe 50, 40 or whatever, so you got a person who has lost their job, or if he wasn't working at all, or she wasn't working at all, they're now hanging out with their friends or whatever they're doing. And when they come back, we talking about it could be drugs or alcohol. And with the actual drugs, in this time, we don't know what it's laced with. So you're talking about a person that may have went through sexual violence maybe once or twice, could be actually experiencing it almost every day.
Jeez.
And we have to think that it could go from her or him to one of the children. So this is a very critical time in our city and our society, period, with this safer at home when it comes to victims of domestic violence. And many of them are in living hell right now. That many of them wish they were not be on the face of the earth anymore, rather than deal with the torture and the things that they're having to deal with at such an escalated rate right now.
What are you hearing from your partners over at MPD For us locally, that's MPD. For those of you that may be something else, but for us locally, what are you hearing from your partners right now about MPD? Are the number of calls going up, or are the number of calls sort of leveled down? I know I got some indications that the calls may be fewer because the people don't have, to your point, as many opportunities to call. But what are you hearing from them as it relates to domestic violence and sexual assault?
Basically the same thing, that the calls are much slower. And even like I said, even for us, it's not this time of the year after the normal IRS tax season is over with, our numbers begin to pick up extremely. And it's just been in the last maybe several days, last 14 days, that we are beginning to see an uptick of those. And so it is concerning for law enforcement, as well as it's concerning for us, that a lot of people are not able to reach out. And in many cases also, I ended up talking with a cousin of a young lady. He has actually taken her phone. So she doesn't even have access. So how many don't even have access to their electronic devices, including their cell phones, to even try to reach out for help? And that's something that we have to think about, that when they get in that violent rage, and actually, begin to abuse and hurt whoever that person is, that victim, then a lot of times they don't even have access to try to get the help that they need. And just so happened, one of the daughters started texting the aunt, and that's how the aunt found out what was actually going on, because he didn't think about taking her phone. And that's how we were able to get this young lady out.
So what does that look like? When you talk about being able to, you mentioned earlier an escape plan, what does that look like, Marquiepta? Can you walk us through that?
Mm-hmm. When we talk about an escape plan, it's a plan that we help the client to develop, to help her stay safe, whether she is housed within the shelter, or if she stays safe in place. And what this consists of, several components. How do you stay safe when you're out in the community? Now we know that we're slowly reopening things, and things are getting back to a little normalcy. So what does that look like? What do you need to do to stay safe? How do you look out for yourself when you're in the community, to make sure that this person does not do any harm to you? We will tell the person things like, you may go your normal route, change your route. Do some different things in how you normally travel. Never travel, by yourself. If you're traveling at night, please make sure that you're talking to someone on the phone to make sure that they can make sure that you get where you're trying to go safely. And if you're in the home with the person, as much as possible, try to get rid of, hot knives, whatever things that they would have used to try to abuse. But they have to be very careful even with that, because if they can't find what they're looking for, then they may find some alternative weapon to actually harm them with. But lights, if they have a close friend that stay near them, if I turn on the back light, which we never turn on, that means I need help. Call 911. Different things where if they just text the number 7, they come up with codes for family and friends, because they may not have a chance to do a whole lot, or even to teach the children, because if the children are old enough, and if this is a severe case, what we bring the children in and help teach them about safety planning. Even when they go to school, that your father cannot, or whomever it is, cannot get custody of you. And even though the teachers may know, you need to make sure that if he comes, you scream, you yell. We teach them how to the smaller kids, how to dial 911. So we include the whole family, unfortunately, when they are fleeing domestic violence, or even trying to stay safe in place, so we can make sure that they stay alive. Make sure you have the things that a lot of times we don't think about. If you're able to make extra copies of important papers like Social Security cards, birth certificates, if you can't get the original ones, take that to someone that you can trust, and start packing the bags. I remember when I left, even when I became adult, when I was involved with my first husband, he was actually an abuser. I started packing little by little and hiding it very deep in the closet. And then I ended up taking stuff to my parents' house. So I tell people, if they can, if they're in a household with someone that they just can't up and leave, you have to plan very strategically to be able to leave. But there are some times when you just have to leave, get up and go, and just go and flee and go to the nearest police department or whatever. I never advise people to go to family members' house, because if that person is a level 10 or whatever, we've seen it too many times. Innocent bystanders end up getting killed. So I think it's important that, we try to keep, once that time comes, family wants to save us. But first of all, we have to make up in our mind that we're sick and tired, and we have to get a plan. And then secondly, we want family and friends to stay safe also. And that's where sheltering is important.
That's good, because you work directly with the police department, and shelters like you work directly with police departments. So don't involve your family members. Go directly to a police station or call the police so they can escort you, which will lessen the possibilities that the person will try to do any harm with you. And then, the police can transport you to a shelter. Right. That is such good advice, and not get family members hurt. Yeah. So one of the things that often people think about, Marquiepta, when they think about domestic violence or sexual assault, we assume that it's always the offender or the perpetrator is always a man. But in speaking with you last year, as we worked together, and as I was touring the shelter, you shared some very interesting information with me about how it can actually be the woman as the abuser, how you have men that are calling your shelter who are being abused by women, and you guys have had a fight in homosexual relationships and the violence there. Can you talk to us a little bit about those two scenarios?
Yes, you're so correct that all the time when we think of domestic violence issues, especially the intimate partner, we think of it's always heterosexual, but then it's not. There are some good men who was raised, like my son has been raised not to hit a woman, you respect a woman and things like that. And what often happens is you get a man who was raised properly, and they end up with a woman who is toxic. And what I mean by being toxic, life has dealt her a hard hand. She may have seen her mama being abused growing up, and she makes a decision, no man will ever hurt me and treat me like my mother was treated. Or because of the trauma that she has gone through herself from watching it grow up, or other things that may have molestation, rape, or whatever traumas that she have gone through, or they just strong women who just said, we're not taking anything from anyone. And so oftentimes you find this a good man, a man who fulfills his role as being a real man. I say that. And he ends up with a woman who is actually that has faced so many traumas and various things that once they get together, he's trying to talk and be calmly. And because the only thing she knows is to scream, fight, and yell, then oftentimes the roles reverse, and she picks on him and scratch him up and do things to him. But because he is a man, oftentimes either his male ego, I can't call the police or do anything, because first of all, I'm a man. They're going to come after me immediately. And secondly, I'm a man, period. This is not supposed to happen to me, but it can happen. And we've had several men. And the last gentleman that we had, he was in a situation where she set everything on fire because he decided that he found out that she was toxic. And he just wanted to get away from her, just wanted her to leave him alone. And of course, she set his house on fire. She set his car on fire. And for him to escape. Yes.
His house on fire?
Yes, she set his house on fire. And so he ended up coming to us just to stay safe while he went through all the processes. And he said, I have a good job. And he said, I'm a professional. And the last thing that I need to do is to get caught up in this and I lose everything that I have. He said, because yes, even if she tries to frame me, by the time the truth comes out, I've already lost my job, my reputation, and everything that is related to me. So that's men often end up in that situation. And the one that I talk about a lot is one who had 3 sets of twins. and he and his wife had various issues going on. She ended up getting addicted to a meth, and she tried to do some harmful things to him and one of the children. And he came to us with 3 sets of twins that he was trying to raise. And so we helped him navigate through the system. We also helped him to get his to be able, we helped him go to counseling so he can understand that there was nothing wrong with him and the man that he was. And so long story short, we helped him and with some of our partner agencies within the city to move back to Seattle. He called us about 2 months ago, and he is doing wonderful. He and the 6 children. And when it comes, and, you know, and so it's we see it a lot, but most people, they like, that can't be real. But yes, it is real. And even when it comes to, you know, the LGBTQ community, those cases can be extremely violent. And we're still trying to rationalize. I think a lot of trauma has to do with it, but we have had several cases. In fact, we just had a transgender about a couple of weeks ago who came and stayed for about a week. And then from there, he actually moved back home. He was from Miami. So we helped him to move home, you know, and so there's multiple things that goes on inside of relationships, and they become very violent. But it doesn't matter if it's a heterosexual relationship or is it LGBTQ relationship. Everyone should be safe in the relationship that they are in, and the relationship should be healthy. But because we don't know, even people, you know, people who seem to have themselves together, when I start talking about, well, what is a healthy relationship? What does that look like for you? And for many people, we don't know. So you can imagine someone who has suffered trauma for many years, they don't have a clue. And all they have seen in their lives are toxic relationships. Well, that toxic relationship is, guess what, for them? It's normal.
Yeah, it's always a danger when the abnormal becomes normal and the normal becomes abnormal, because that's about perception. That is all about your perception and your perspective from your vantage point. I learned that as well. It's so disheartening. One of the things that you mentioned about there could be professional people, interestingly enough to me, of course, I host the Total Woman Summit, and a woman walked up to me and said to me, she's like, yeah, you do the Total Woman Summit. I was out about just in the world and life. And she was talking to me in one sense about, you know, the Total Woman Summit and the work I do and then the consulting work I do. And then she went on to tell me she was trying to decide if she was going to leave her abusive husband or whether she was going to run for an office.
Wow.
Very successful. Very successful. So money isn't an issue, but you're right. Her self-esteem was incredibly low. And she was putting performance on top and accomplishments on top of trauma and pain. And so it seems so bizarre to me, because I'm not a licensed victim advocate. I'm none of those things. And so I certainly would have referred her. But it seems so odd to me that she could figure out how to get 3 degrees, how to navigate corporate America, how to obtain several promotions. She could not figure out if it was important enough for her to get out of this violent situation with her husband or run for public office.
Wow. And you know, performance becomes a part of your life, because I actually did a lot of performing. You know, I've been single now for 11 years, and we were both ministers. And, you know, we had almost $300,000 house in Bartlett, and we're saving other people's marriages and counseling and all of that. Here I was dying, and I was performing. And people were thinking that, oh, they're just a perfect couple. We were even getting ready to start our own church. But once I went home, he was more of he was a controller, a manipulator, but he used the word of God, would never hit, raise his voice, or do anything of that nature. And, you know, when you think about religion abuse, that's a whole different other topic and subject.
That's a whole new term. That's a whole new term. I was going to say manipulation, religion abuse
Yes, abuse is a whole term, and it's amazing how people can control people. And with religion, with the word of God beating people upside the head and keeping them bound in relationships that they should have ran from years ago, and including I'm talking about myself. I'm very transparent for people that know me, and so a performer. I was a great performer, but I was taking NyQuil at night. And if I wouldn't have made a decision to get out of suit, I would have probably overdosed on something of just keeping it real, because we looked so good on the outside. And see, oftentimes with professional women, we can, and just people in general, we can be who we need to be when we need to be. But when it comes to navigating, because of even on the inside, if we begin to pull back her onion, there's a story behind her issues. And if we pull that back, somewhere in her lifetime, trauma, she went through some type of trauma, or maybe multiple types of trauma. And because of that, she decided, I'm going to be very successful, and my success will define who I am. Although, in order to still have that success is not success without having a husband, without having that piece. So now I have the career, and I have the husband, and I have reached top levels, but on the inside, I'm still crying and I'm still hurting. And I know that this relationship is not good, but in order for me to continue my performance and the look that we have, how we look so well together, how we look like we have accomplished so much, I have to decide, if I get out of that, how would this affect? It may not necessarily affect my career, but if I want to run for public office, then what would he say? What kind of things, accusations would be brought against me that could destroy me all over? So sometimes we'll stay in harmful situations, and we will convince ourselves that it's not that bad. It's really not as bad as I think it is. It's just, and then we'll rationalize, what did we do to cause this to happen, or whatever he said, or whatever has gone on. And so really, that's when self-care has to come into place, and the person has to recognize something is wrong with me. And I had to recognize, okay, I keep attracting this type of person. Marquiepta, what's wrong with you? And that's how I came up with my mirror. People who know me, I do things with mirror, I do women events with mirrors and all of that. Because we have to really, yes, that person is an abuser, they're doing this, but on the inside of me, deep in my heart, I have some heart issues that I've had for a very long time, and I need help to resolve these. So once I resolved my heart issues, which was still, for me, I was still holding on to that little girl that my father hit years ago. And I was performing all those times. I had to let him go. I had to deal with the trauma of my mother never telling me how much she loved me, and going through abuse with her. But now that I know she went through abuse with her, she was never said that she was loved. My father was never told that they were loved. So there are so many things that I have learned, but it starts with looking at ourselves first, pulling that mirror out and doing a self-evaluation.
Wow, that is a recurring theme. And so, first of all, I just want to applaud you for being willing and courageous enough to share your story in the hopes of helping someone else. We don't take that lightly. And so I just want to say thank you for that. Thank you for embracing vulnerability in hopes to help some other woman. We appreciate that very much. And so, to your point, Marquiepta, about women really needing to get clear on doing the hard work, that's been a recurring theme throughout this series. Is I often say you have to do the hard work, the HART work, which is the hard work, the HARD work, and people run from it. They don't want to do it. And in her case, you're absolutely right. She was concerned about the reputational damage, potential reputational damage, because some of that is just you've imagined that, right? No one's really thinking about you that much. But in some cases, right, there may be a threat of reputational damage or the perception of who people believe you are.
Yes, that's important for a lot of people.
It's important for a lot of people, and I'll give you a real case in point example of that. So this is a very light example, but it gives you an indication of what that looks like because of all the behind the scenes narratives that we were able to see on screen. So when we watched Girls Trip, did you see that movie, Marquita?
Yes,
You
I
watched
did
Girls
several
Trip and
times.
yes, like all the rest of us. How many of you, by show of hands, have seen Girls Trip? You can use the controls at the bottom of your screen or your device to get, yeah, so they've seen Girls Trip to get to it. So you've seen Girls Trip and you remember the character Ryan. And Ryan and her friends were going to the Essence Music Fest to celebrate. And then Ryan and her husband had this really crazy relationships and dichotomy between them. And it was all based off image and perception of who people thought they were. And they agreed to perpetuate that lie. So for money, for fame, for notoriety, for all of those things. But really what he was doing to her was also abuse. And I often say to people, our biggest offender is first ourselves against us, because you have to, first of all, create a narrative that it's okay for you to be treated like that. So she had a conversation with herself or several over a period of time that established that it was okay for them to cross this boundary, that my self-respect is less important than my notoriety or who other people think I am. And so that happens every day with women or men, whomever chooses to stay in an abusive relationship. And abuse comes in a variety of ways, right? It's the physical abuse, it's the verbal abuse, it's the psychological abuse, it's the emotional abuse, it's the weaponizing the word of God, which is the gospel is supposed to be the good news about the love of God and Jesus for us. But they weaponize even the word to use it against you to create this sort of coercive control. That's the language that I got this morning from our expert, Sandy.
It is.
Who's coming coercive control, where they're using all of these other measures outside of physical abuse to control you and create a narrative that you owe them or you don't want to do anything to disrupt the harmony in the relationship. Like, how can there be harmony if you're harming me? I mean, those two things don't go together.
They really don't.
Yeah,
they really don't. But you're right. But in the abuser's mind, the harmony and all of that is with him being 100% in control. As long as you do everything that I'm telling you to do, for in his mind, it's harmony. Everything is working fine. But on the inside, but it's not working fine at all. And and we can never forget about financial abuse. Being in charge, taking. We've had some ladies. I was talking to the young ladies when I went to Cinco de Mayo Day at the shelter today, and they were talking about they've been getting calls recently regarding men who have taken complete control of their financial situation. It wasn't like that before COVID-19, but now that COVID-19 has happened, where they said even just today, they had at least 3 calls regarding how do I get out of this situation? And saying a lot of people think if they're not hitting you physically, hitting you upside your head or your body, that you're not really the other abuses don't matter. Emotional abuse does. Yes, it does. Because in many cases, a scar may heal, but I could hear what you say to me over and over in my head. It's like chatter in my head because I remember being told, I made you. You'll never be anything. You'll never be anything. You're right. As long as I was with you, I could not find my way clearly. But the moment I was disconnected from you, I went back to college. I wouldn't even have the job in the role that I have now if I would not have gotten out that situation, because he would squeeze the life just like a python, just squeezing all hopes and dreams and aspirations out. And that is what so many women go through. They're lively, they're vibrant. You're going out as girlfriends and all of this. And then he comes along and their whole personality and everything about them begins to change. And a lot of times that comes because we don't want to be lonely. We're lonely. And when we become lonely, many of us will accept anything, just a piece of a man, a half of a man, so just so I won't have to be here by myself. So when we make that decision, we are accepting all of his trauma, all the things that he has gone through in his life, And now he's bringing that into your life because he's never gotten it resolved, and he's never got the proper mental health training or just sitting down talking to a therapist. And now he's bringing this to you, and all of a sudden, all family and friends is what happened to her. She allowed the loneliness to cause her to wreck herself instead of being able to move forward. And loneliness is big. It's huge. I've dealt with that transparent moment again.
Yeah,
But then,
for sure.
because of the things I have gone through in my life, you know, I have standards. You know, people say they're rules or whatever, but it's certain things that you know, that triggers certain things, and that's with everyone. That's how some men that have women who they're good women, you know, they're professional, and they say that wrong word, or they smell something, and it triggers what happened to them by the other person or the ex-person or something when they were 10 years old. And all of a sudden this person just explode, and the gentleman or the woman looking saying, what just happened to them? They never dealt with the issues of it goes back to that. They've never dealt with those issues of the heart. And sometimes people need a little assistance. They may need therapeutic assistance, and they may just need a little assistance of some medication just to help balance them out. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you make such great points, and I just wanted to go back to something that you said about lowering our standards, right? You can't compromise your standards in exchange for your safety, in exchange for your overall well-being. And if you have done that, today is a good day to make a change. Today is a good day to make a change. You don't have to continue to do that, because we do want to inspire and instill hope into you. Loneliness is a natural part of life. It's a natural thing. You don't have to lean into and let loneliness consume you, and you don't have to be single and be lonely. Me
either. You know, I learned to go to the movies by myself. I can go where, you know, before all of the COVID-19, I could go to movies. I could go to dinner by myself. I enjoy going shopping, just doing those are the things that help me do self-care for myself, or the things that we, you know, with the work that we do. And I just want to say thank you again for when I was probably in that deepest moment of just working. And you said, Marquiepta, you need to take care of yourself. And for anyone that's listening, take care of you. You have to make yourself number one. I remember going to that mirror, looking in that mirror and saying, Marquiepta, you are beautiful. It doesn't matter if anyone else said it. And now I love Marquiepta. I love me. I may wear some stripes. I may wear this. People may not like it, but as long as I like it and I feel good in what I am doing and who I am, no one can change that.
No one can change that. And you hold the power to that. That's such a great point. You've got to, first of all, learn how to fall in love with yourself. Yes. And if you've been robbed of that and what that feels like, or have never known what that's like, that's why we're encouraging you to go to therapy, get into treatment. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy at all. It is actually going to be very hard. You're going to have some difficult conversations. You're going to have to make some difficult discoveries about how you have helped lead you to the place where you are. Not that you're at fault, but you did play a role in getting where you are, and we want you to be free, healthy, happy, and whole. And so, let me ask you a question. So many times we hear that it takes a woman, or we're in South saying woman, but that's largely statistics are women. That's why we keep saying that. But we recognize the victims come in all shapes and sizes and genders. But when a victim, it takes them about 7 to 9 times, I think you and Sandy have made me aware of, that it takes about 7 to 9 times for a victim to actually leave an abusive relationship. Can you share a little bit more with us about why that's the case? And then, secondly, explain to us how we can continue to have compassion and empathy for those folks that keep returning to those situations.
You know, oftentimes they continue to go back and forth because for many of them, it just seems so complicated. The system, which I mean, the how to acquire services. And now it has been made a lot easier, but also internally eternally dealing with their own selves. You think about it. If someone is paying your bills and up until they have what they consider as an episode, then he's taking care of everything. And I only have an 8th grade education. So I've got to learn how to take care of me for the first time. And I got 4 children. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? So many times they go back and forth, first of all, because they hadn't finally got to that point that enough is enough. I remember picking up the phone when I was going through it, getting ready to call the YWCA. This was the early 90s. And I hung up the phone. And I hung up the phone because I wasn't ready yet. But then one night after we were riding in the car and he backhanded me and blood started just rushing out of my nose, we're driving and a police officer pulls up. And I'm grateful for law enforcement. But during that time, we didn't have domestic violence laws in place. And the police pulled over and said, clean her up, don't do it anymore. I thought that was my way out. I was like, finally, I'm getting ready to get out. And after that, I started thinking, how am I going to get out of this? I can't go to my family and friends because guess what? He had isolated me from everyone, all the help. So in my mind, I thought that no one was willing to help me, but everyone was waiting for me to say, help me. I need a way out of escape. So oftentimes they go back and forth because they'll start calling, baby, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I just had a bad day at work, or you shouldn't have went through my phone. If you wouldn't have went through my phone, I would have never did that to you. And they convince them that they are the only person that loves them. And you just need to come back home. And then they come back home. Then they go through the honeymoon phase where he gives flowers and may buy some gifts. Go give her the money to go to get to the hairstylist, to the salon, do all those things. And then the next time the abuse gets greater. And so it's like that cycle is, okay, I love him and I want to be with him, but I want him to be different. And they sweet talk him and tell him all that stuff. And they go back and then they tell him, you can't make it without me, because they've played so much with their psychological sense of, hey, you're nothing without me. So they'll go back and forth. And unfortunately for so many of them, they end up a fatality because they're in their hearts and minds. They didn't think that he would really do that because he really loves me. No, anyone that hits you, verbally abuse you, anyone that physically abuse you, anyone that emotional, psychological, or even financial or sexually abuse you, that person does not love you. That person is harming you, and you could end up being a fatality if you don't get the help. And so that's why we see that cycle. It's a layer of things that I could probably talk about for an hour, because all cases are not the same. The shoe doesn't fit all sizes of situations of why women actually go back. But oftentimes, many of them they're tired and they're drained, and they just don't want the responsibility of being out on their own, because many have never been out on their own. And the thing when it comes for us to have sympathy and empathy, it's very important. And I think it's hard for that. We have a hard time of people wanting to donate to domestic violence because they often think he or she can just get out. They don't have to put up with that. But what people don't understand is the trauma that person has gone through. We don't know before they got to that person what type of lifestyle and what type of issues that they've had. And oftentimes, kind of like the things that I just mentioned, if that person is a sole support of you and you've never worked, or you may have worked before, you may have several degrees, but this person have you so terrified that when with their number pops up on the phone, you go to shivering and shaking. Well, mind control, but it goes back to the power and control wheel. When we look at that power and control wheel, isolation, using the children, the blame game, male privilege, and we can go on and on that power and control wheel. And so they use the power and control to use them, because it happened to me. Once again, I remember him telling me, oh, you'll never be anything. I made you. If I leave you, you're going to die. Just all kinds of things. And if you know, what does it say? If we keep hearing something long enough, we will believe it. And that's oftentimes why people don't leave, because they are terrified to start on their own, or they tried to leave before and they tried to get an order of protection and things didn't work out right. So now they feel hopeless. There's nothing else for me to do. I might as well go back. The system, what they call the steps in place to help me, failed me. And sometimes they don't get an order of protection, and they truly need it, because he may have an attorney that is one of the top attorneys in the city of Memphis, and he has enough money to keep fighting you and beating you down until the point where you just say, forget it. I'll just go back and just take whatever.
Wow. So we've heard a lot. Number one, we need to continue to have compassion and empathy. And yes, my breath was taken away a little bit, because this is something that I'm very passionate about. As I think about, I have the convenience and luxury of being at home and being in peace, and I am actually safer at home if I choose to continue to shelter at home. But knowing that somebody else is living in an alternate reality where that's not the truth for them. So that's why my breath is taken away a little bit by that. So just so we're clear, we need to continue to have compassion. Statistically, it takes someone 7 to 9 times to leave an abuser, because there are a lot of factors. The complexities of living, the shame, the fear, the trauma, the increased and escalated violence, and then they may not have the resources or the confidence that they can live absent of that person. So in order for us to remain supportive and compassionate in this scenario, get the help that you need for yourself. If you are supporting someone who is attempting to escape, so you can continue to be present for them and express your frustrations to someone else, not them, and not to someone that will put them in increased risk. So we don't want to do that either. We do not want to increase the risk. But she's mentioned to us several stories where people have left. First of all, she started with herself. She stopped the cycle of violence because she got the help. Even after being a child raised up in that scenario, she talked about how later her father got the help that he needed, and so that her mom and now they are living a very healthy life, so things can change. Then she talked about how she got into a relationship, having grown up in that cycle of violence, and then now she got free from that and has lived her best absolute life, gone on to get several degrees, and she's now leading the agencies, one of the agencies that provides some of this help to those families or persons wanting to flee violent situations. So, and then she talked to us about a gentleman who was on the opposite end and in the minority, where he was a man that was being abused by his partner and fled with the children, who happened to be 3 sets of twins, and how he called 2 months ago to say he's doing well, the children are doing well. So there is hope. And can you, as we get ready to wrap up this conversation, Marquiepta, can you tell us, you mentioned that people often don't want to give to shelters because they have lost the compassion for those who are in that position, and they view that inappropriately as someone who could leave at any time, but we have already discussed all of that. But she mentioned to me that they currently have a campaign where they are trying to do something nice for the 38 children that they currently have at their domestic violence shelter. In order for us to help them, you can go to their Facebook page and participate in this campaign, and we encourage you to do so and to share it with your friends and followers. You can find them at the YWCA Greater Memphis. And Shamel's going to tap that in chat. We're going to ask you to make sure that you share, and make sure that you give, and encourage others to share, and give. Because the last thing we want is for a victim who is on their way to being a survivor to go somewhere and they don't have the resources that they need to support them. We do not want that. We do not want them comparing the two and saying I was better off in a violent situation because they don't even have all the things that I need here. So, Marquiepta, it has been a pleasure having you on tonight. It's always good seeing you and talking to you and learning more about what you're doing in the community. And so, again, if you all would like to help the shelter, you can do it two ways. You can go to their website, which Shamel has put in the chat, or you can follow them on Facebook at the YWCA Greater Memphis to participate in their giving campaign. And if they would like to give other tangibles, because you mentioned you guys are also having challenges like the rest of the world, getting toiletries and disinfectants and wipes or whatever. If they would like to participate in that way, or they have access to those things, can you tell them how they can get in touch with you to get those things to you?
Yeah, they can contact me at 901-320-6019 is my office number. Now, we're still doing some telework, and we're actually doing both, so I can also give my cell number, which is 901-337-3460. Any help is always appreciative because all of our services are free. We don't charge our clients for anything. And I am just grateful for whatever anyone can do to us. And if you don't even think about the adults, which we should, let's think about the children and the trauma and the things that we're trying to do to make their lives better. Today we had May Day and Cinco de Mayo Day for our children. You should have saw the smiles that for this brief time they could forget about where they came, what they've been going through, and focus on fun and a normal life again.
As a kid, and we certainly want to give a kid an opportunity to be a kid. And Marquiepta, before we go, give us that office number one more time. It's
901-320-6019, and that's my the office number.
901-320.
Yeah.
6019.
That's it. That's correct. I'm sorry, I got you a little off there. That's it.
No, you're fine. I just want to make sure she's able to drop that in the chat. It's 901-320-6019. For those, you can always give whenever you see the video. You can always give. They
Most
are always
definitely.
taking donations, always. So thank you all so much for joining us. If you will please complete the survey, as soon as this is over, you'll get a pop-up screen with the survey in it. We'd love to hear your feedback so we can continue to bring you good content that's meaningful and transformational for you. So give us your feedback. We'd love to hear it. Marquiepta, thank you so much again for joining us. I hope you have a lovely evening.
You too.
Ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And you
I
all
hope to talk with you soon.
I hope so. All right. Well, we'll see you guys tomorrow as we talk about leadership as we continue the 11 days, 26 speakers, and 22 sessions in this free virtual workshop series. Have a great night.
Have a great one.